Hi guys, welcome to day 25 of the Elevate Profit Challenge. We're really getting there now, and we're going to spend the next 5 days implementing a couple of the final things to really make the most of this cash flow spreadsheet. So getting on top of your cash flow and knowing what's coming in and out of your business and where it's going is a really important process to have implemented within your business. It really helps you kind of gain understanding of how your business is performing. But just on its own, whilst it's a really good management tool, it's only really part of the process. You need to be able to adjust it and craft it into what it really could be. And that starts with establishing yourself a few targets for where your margins and where your business can and should be growing to. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over where we're currently at, and we're going to help you establish a few targets that you want your company to grow into. And we're going to go over how to go about that. And then once we've established those targets, we're going to kind of tell you and show you how to grow into those targets efficiently and effectively. So as always, the first part of the process on any given day when you're sitting down to do this is to just go through your daily transactions and just put the income into the relevant pots and take out the expenses from those relevant pots as well. So we spent the last week doing it, so I'm not going to go through this one step at a time. I'm going to quickly whiz through that because we already know what we're doing. We've done it lots and lots of times already. So there's no income for this day. I've got the days down here. I've got no income, so delete that income from the column, and then take away all of those outgoings out of the relevant pot. So we've got one material, we've got 3 expenses. So what we need to do is make sure they're coming out of those relevant pots. Okay, so 111 out of the materials. And then we've got the 34, 180, and the 90 coming out of the expense pot. Okay, so once you've done that, what you do is just change your date up there to the 25th of January because that's today's date. And then effectively that's acting as a bookmark, and you know exactly where you're up to. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the process of setting up your targets and how to go about that. It's not too much work, it's not too much effort. We're going to use a couple of industry standards that we've come up with that tends to help landscapers the most. It's the margins and percentages that we've found. If you're really efficient with your cash flow and your income, that's exactly where you could be, you could and should be sitting. So we're going to run through those and how to establish them for yourself. And then once we've done all that, we can show you how to grow your margins to actually meet those targets. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to set up a small table consisting of 3 columns. If it's going to let me do that, it doesn't look like it is, unfortunately. So the first column that we start with is the category. So this is going to be the same categories as you found down here. So grab those and just copy and paste those underneath. What we're going to do this time instead is we're going to add another column. So insert cells, shift everything down, and we're going to do mat and mat totals. And again, I'll explain everything. I'll explain why in a second. And so we've got the category, and then we've got the target percent, and we've got the gross percent. Again, I'll explain what all of these are in the meantime. So the target percentages is ultimately where you want your business to grow its margins to, and the growth that you want to make within your margins. And the targets for that are completely based on your materials and your VAT target percentages. So materials and VAT we don't touch. So what you want to do is set up a formula there that just says equals, and then click the box that they belong to. We don't want to touch those. We want to maintain a materials margin, and obviously a VAT we don't want to touch. We want to keep that where it is. And what we're doing is this added column. What we want to do here is you want to add a little top and a bottom line, and we want to total these 2 above. Okay, so add a sum formula of the 2 above plus the 1 above it. So we've got the total there. And then what we want to do is, because we've got established percentages for these 5 categories here, but they are completely dependent on your materials and your VAT margins. Some companies' materials margins are really high, some are really low. So all these subsequent targets completely depend on what you do with your materials. So the gross percentages are the targets that we ultimately want to split the remainder down into. So that is 5% for profit, that's 50% of the remainder for your own pay, and it's 15% of tax, 15% wages, and 15% expenses. These are the kind of gross percentages that we work to, completely depending on what's left after you've subtracted your materials and VAT margins. So in order to get the target percentage out of 100, because obviously if we added all of these to the 36.5, you're going to get 136.5%, and that's no good to us. So what we want to do is get the target percentages based on the gross percentage. So the remainder, after we've got 36.5% taken away out of the total, we want 5% of that remainder to go as our target percentage. So the best way to do that is there's a formula that we need to do. So start with putting equals in this one. And it's 100% minus this total here. And what that gives us our remainder. And obviously we want 5% of that remainder for profit. So what we do is we times that by 5%. And that gives us our total there of 3.17%. What we want to do is we want to fill that out for the rest of the below based on their percentages here. And the best way to do that is just put a dollar sign before H15. So a dollar before the H and a dollar before the 15. Click enter. And that means that those numbers won't change when you autofill to the bottom, and then drag that, autofill the rest of them. Excuse me. So the best way to do that, again, I've done it now, so it doesn't really matter. But the best way to do that, in fact, is don't just write times 5%. That's my mistake. Times this box here. I give you the same answer, but don't write 5% because otherwise it would drag down and you'll just write 5% on all of them. But now if you drag it down, it will base that percentage off of these gross percentages here. So these effectively act as your targets. So they are moving targets. They completely depend on your materials and your VAT percentage. So whenever you adjust your materials or your VAT, which you might have to do from time to time if you're not happy. Say if your materials margin or your cost of your materials that you're buying go up and you don't want to pass that cost on to the customer, if you then say up that to say 40%, for example, that should be reflected down here. And as you can see, these targets will adjust based on that adjustment to materials. I mean, ultimately, we don't want that to happen. We want the materials margin to stay consistent and we want these targets to be what you end up with. But all I can say is that if you did ever need to adjust them, then these will all fall into place accordingly. And then your job is to then work towards the targets that you feel like you need to work towards. Again, for example, if you see down here, these gross percentages can also change. So if you decide that 40% is 50% is too much and you'd rather work to 40%, you change that and it'll adjust your target, but then just make sure you readjust everything else. So you actually want 20% wages, 20% expenses. Just make sure the whole thing totals 100. So if you wanted to do another little total box like we've got up here, just stick a little red box around it and then put your little formula in there, which is equal sum, as most of them are, these numbers above it. And just make sure they add up to 100. So we'll stick with our 50% and our 15s. But you can see everything else will adjust accordingly. And again, these are all then now completely dependent on each other. So as you change your targets and as you change your kind of realities, I guess, these will all fall into place until you can get as close to them as you possibly can. So once we've got our targets, and what we're then doing is on a monthly basis, we are adjusting our percentages to get as close to them as we can. Okay, so we're aiming to reduce. In this example, you can see that we're aiming to reduce expenses and wages down to here. We're aiming to increase tax, increase owner's pay, and increase profit percentages up to these values here. So every month, what we're going to do is we're going to take either 1% out of wages or expenses, and we're going to reallocate them to the pots that we want to reallocate them to. So, for example, let's say for this month, from 33.12%, we want to adjust that by 1%. It's the end of January. So adjust that by 1% down to 32 point, all those numbers. And we want to put those into either profit or owner's pay. So we want to put 0.6 into profit or owner's pay. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, we'll go for owner's pay this month. 0.6% in there. And then as always, we want to put 0.2% into VAT and 0.2% into tax. Simple way to keep on top of your numbers. And as you can see, because our VAT percentage went up a little bit, these percentages here all fall in line and they all adjust themselves accordingly. And that's what we're looking for. So on a month-to-month basis, let's say, for example, I'm going to test my maths here. We adjust it by 10% for expenses. We get that down to 22%. There's 10% that needs to be reallocated. So that's 6% into owner's pay. So let's just add 17% into there. And then that will be 2% into tax and 2% into VAT. Bingo. So then you can see here, again, with the adjustments going up, your targets will all adjust little by little until you've got something that you're happy with. And all you've got to do is just keep moving that on a month-by-month basis. So keep looking at your expenses, keep cutting them, keep looking at your wage bill and keep cutting it until you're operating a really, really hyper-efficient business and you're making adjustments to as close as you can possibly get it. So again, let's say, for example, what is that? We have another 10% come out. So do exactly the same thing again, just as a tester. We add 6%, let's just say 3% onto profit. Let's say 2% onto profit, 4% onto owner's pay. And then we've got the extra 2% onto each of the taxes as well. Once again, you can see that everything's adjusted accordingly. And all you're trying to do is just constantly adjust your numbers until they reflect the numbers and the targets that you are ultimately left with. So you can see the profit is now getting there. That's really, really close. Owner's pay's got a little way to go, etc., etc., etc. Tax still got a little way, but wages and expenses need to be reduced accordingly until all your numbers are kind of reflecting in your target. So it's a constant process. It's a constant ongoing management until you're happy with where you're at. For example, if we now say there was £5,000 or £2,500 coming in one day, you can now see that all your income is now adjusted for those new margins that you've now established for yourself. Okay, so as you reduce your expenses, there's more and more going into your VAT pot, which is exactly what you want to be doing. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll leave that here for now. I really, really recommend that you insert these little targets and those formulas and this little table here to help you keep track of your targets and help you make sure that you are heading in the right direction and you ultimately know how you want your margins to end up. So what we're going to do is, this is just for example. So I'm going to roll over these margins and these adjustments that we've got for the rest of the month, for the rest of the 4 days that we've got left, and that's it. Again, if yours don't look like this, that's absolutely fine. But just make sure that your data is appropriate for your company and it's used real data for your company. And then looking at establishing these targets via this method that we've just outlined here, make sure that all your numbers you're happy with, again, for you and your company, and we'll adjust that. You can adjust that small percentage per month. So 1% per month is probably ideal. And just make sure that your targets are in line with your ambitions, I guess. So that's it for today. Get that all set up and we'll be back again tomorrow. And what we're going to do tomorrow is we're going to go through another set of daily transactions, as always. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start work on building out your pricing calculator, which is exactly the reason, which is one of the main reasons why we're here, because we want to get our pricing right up front as well. And with your pricing correct and your cash flow managed, then before you know it, you're going to have a highly profitable business, which generates you plenty of cash for you to use as you please. All right, so checking again tomorrow. It's an exciting video tomorrow, and we're going to look at setting up that pricing calculator, which is the kind of crown jewel of the whole process. So check back in tomorrow, and we'll get going with that. And as always, any questions, just let me know. We'll be happy to help.